All right, we're just gonna have to see how it's gonna work. Let me get into position here.
Introduction to the History of the Crusades XP. Book I-80 300 to 1095. First Crusade. Early pilgrimages to the Holy Land, veneration for the Holy Sepulchre, Palestine visited by the early Christians, Jerusalem their peaceful asylum, profaned by fire, worshippers, recaptured by Heraclius, spread of the religion of Muhammad, worship of the Magi annihilated by Mohammedanism, Empire of Persia torn by intestinal quarrels, anarchy of the East, fanaticism and bravery of the Saracens, their conquests, paganism annihilated by Mohammedanism, monarchy of the Gulf overturned, Charles Martel, the Caliph Omar captures Jerusalem, Christians, persecuted by the Muslims, pilgrimages of Peter the Hermit, and C. Harun al-Rashid, Charlemagne, siege of Constantinople, Baghdad, conquest of the Arabians, Saint Bernard commerce of the East, Caliphs of Baghdad, the Fatimites, the Greeks, Antioch, Zimisces, Emperor of the Greeks, Fatimite Caliphs captured Jerusalem, Caliphs, Cairo, William of Tyre, persecutions of the Jews, pilgrims, Memphis, Bethlehem, monasteries for the pilgrims, hospitals at Jerusalem, mystery of the redemption, pilgrimages of distinguished persons the forerunner of the Crusades, the Turks, the Sultan Mahmud, Togglebeg, victorious career of the Turks, Malik Shah, Jerusalem capture, Nicaea, the Greeks, the exiled tribes, 11 emperors of Constantinople Hutu. Death of Zimisces, military ardor of the Franks, Michael Dupin, Pope Gregory VII power of the Popes, Rome, Pope Hildebrand, Pope Victor III. Insight, Christians, arms against the infidels, conquest of the Genoese and Pisans, Peter the Hermit, his interviews with the Patriarch of Jerusalem and Pope Urban II. The Crusades instigated by Peter, first determined on at the Council of Clermont, conducted by Urban II. Enthusiasm in the Faber pages 1 to 60. Book 2. AD 1096 to 1097. Immense armies collected in various parts of Europe. Peter, the hardest chosen general of the Crusades, opposed by the Hungarians and Bulgarians, Spain, Litvia, the Crusaders, reached Constantinople, Alexius Comnenus, Rapacity and cruelty of the Crusaders, their defeat and slaughter, fresh armies sent from Europe, their distinguished leaders, they wage war against the Greeks, alliance of Godfrey, the Julian with Alexius of Constantinople, wretched, situation of the remains of Peter's army in Bithynia, the Turkish power, kingdom of Erzurum, siege of Nice, battle of Gorgoni, the Turks defeated by the Crusaders, Sultan of Nice desolates the country, Antioch shut up, Iconium, Tarsus, captured by Baldwin, his conflicts with Tancred, capture of Alexandria and Edessa by the Crusaders, they arrived in Mesopotamia pages 61 to 125. Book 3 1097 to 1099. The Crusaders everywhere triumphing, their sufferings in, passing Mount Horus, enter Syria, Damascus, Aleppo, capture of Chalcis and Artesia, siege of Antioch, Sweden, Denmark, barbarous treatment of the Turks, ambassadors from Egypt, city of Helen, the Crusaders relieved by the peasants, and Genoese Baldwin, Prince of Edessa, Antioch captured, quarrel of Godfrey de Bouillon and Bohemond, Kurboga, Sultan of Mosul, Sultan of Persia sent an immense army against the Crusaders, contests before Antioch, suffering of the Crusaders, subtle policy of Alexius, Kurboga, besieges Antioch, pretended miracles, the sacred lands, preached Peter the Hermit to the Saracen leaders, and Kurboga's haughty reply, Saracens defeated by the Crusaders, instances of heroic bravery, magnificent, encampment of Kurboga, the miraculous influence of the Holy Land doubted, death of Baldwin Count of Hedog, fatal epidemic at Antioch, Death of Bishop I, docility of a lion, Geoffrey de la Tour, Falk and his widow, he says. The Emir allies himself with the Crusaders and defeats the Sultan of Aleppo. Letters convey 5 pigeons, miraculous prodigies, capture of Mora, conquests in Syria by the Crusaders, pages 126 to 186. Book 4. AD 1099 to 1103. The Crusaders take their departure from Antioch and march for Palestine. Siege of Arcas, Pons de Balassu, Arnolda, Rose, and his disbelief in prodigies, fanaticism of Barthélemy, the Holy Lands, ordeal by fire, hatred of the Latins towards the Greeks, Caliph of Cairo, Emir of Tripoli, defeated, Palestine, Phoenicia, plain of Berytus, serpents, Ptolemy, Emmaus and Bethlehem, alarm from an eclipse, the city of Jerusalem, enthusiasm of the Crusaders on first beholding it, siege of Jerusalem, indignities heaped upon the Christians, fountain of Silo, the Genoese fleet enter, the port of Jaffa, Gaston de Bern, Mount of Olives, address of Arnold de Rose, speech of Peter the Hermit to the Crusaders, Tower of Tancred, machines used at the siege of Jerusalem, the Saracen magicians, miraculous appearance of St. George, the Crusaders enter Jerusalem by storm, Cretan, Rano, Eber de Pizai, Mosque of Allah, slaughter of the Mussulmans, impious fervor of the Christians, destruction of the Jews, well found in Jerusalem, discovery of the true cross, speech of the Count of Flanders, prophetic visions, Godfrey elected king of Jerusalem, rejoicing among the Christians, and despair of the Mussulmans, elegies mark Emperor of Italy, the Mussulman commander, signal defeat of the Saracens at Ascalon, Tasso, Godfrey's quarrel with Raymond, siege of Ascalon, Raya de Lali, Stephen de Salviac, Peter de Salviac, death of Gaston de Bern, Peter the Hermit and many of the Christian leaders returned to Europe, William Norman, Count of Flanders, at that point east, William, Count de Nevers, defeated by the Turks, Duke of Burgundy, slain, Conrad, Marshal of Henry I of Germany, Wolf 9. Duca, Bavaria, Humbert II. Count of Savoy, departs for the home land, Alexius, Emperor of Constantinople, opposes the Crusaders, city of Antioch captured, the Crusaders defeated by the Turks, capture of Tortosa, invasions of the Tartars, Tassos Jerusalem delivered ordinances of Gastinda, burn pages 187 to 264. Book BOD 1099 to 1148. Kingdom founded by the victories of the Crusaders. State of Palestine at that period, political measures of Godfrey, Tiberius captured by Tancred, siege of Arcer, Jerusalem, visited by numerous sovereigns and distinguished Crusaders, Archbishop Lambert led the Patriarch of Jerusalem, the father of Jerusalem, death of Godfrey, his brother, Baldwin elected king, carries on successful hostilities against the infidels of Palestine, Egypt, and sea. Caesarea and Arcer besieged and captured, city of Ramla taken by the Saracens, hospitals of St. John, insidious policy of Alexius, Jocelyn de Courtenay, Baldwin taken prisoner, Bohemond, Prince of Antioch, visits Italy, and returns, with a large army against Alexius, his death, release of Baldwin, distresses of Antioch, quarrels between Baldwin and the Patriarch of Jerusalem, the Genoese and Gizon, fleets assist the Crusaders, siege and capture of Ptolemy, armies of Egypt defeated, Tripoli, Byblis, Sarepta, Berytus, and Sidon, taken by the Crusaders. Prince of Norway, the true cross, death of Tancred, the Christians, defeated, Palestine devastated, death of Baldwin II, Lord elected King of Jerusalem, taken prisoner, Eustache, Grenier, regent, the Phoenicians destroy the fleet of the Saracens, and conquer Tyre, release of Baldwin, several cities of Egypt captured, the Ismailians, Zengi, Prince of Mosul, dynasty of the Atabecs, flourishing state of Antioch, Edessa, Tripoli, and C. Knights of St. John and of the Holy Sepulchre, the Templars, death of Baldwin du Bourg, Falk of Anjou, crown king of Jerusalem, Raymond of Poitiers appointed governor of Antioch. The Emperor of Constantinople attacks Antioch. Melisende, Queen of Jerusalem. Baldwin III ascends the throne. Disastrous retreat from Bosra, the country of Traconite. Conquest of Zengi. Death of Jocelyn de Courtenay. Nureddin, son of Zengi, captures Edessa and threatens Jerusalem. Pages 265 to 328. Book 6. AD 1142 to 1148. Second Crusade. Europe aroused to a second crusade by the impending dangers of Jerusalem and the Holy Land. The abbot Street Bernard, Louis VII. Of France, he destroys Vitry, repents, and determines on a crusade against the infidels, but Eugenius flees. Invokes the assistance of the Pope, added of Versailles, preaching of Saint Bernard, state of the Germanic Empire, Conrad III. Invokes the General Daza, many distinguished personages take their cross, including the Germans, Conrad, and Louis VII. Arrive at Constantinople, hypocritical policy of the emperor, and treachery of the Greeks. Alarmed, created by an eclipse of his sun, the Crusaders defeated by the Turks. The Oriflamme, fatal blunder of Geoffrey de Rankin, reported death of Louis VII Emperor des Bars, Grand Master of the Templars, perfidious policy of the Greeks, sufferings of the Crusaders. Louis VII arrives at Antioch with a small portion of his army. Eleanor of Guienne repudiated by her husband, Louis VII proceeds to the Holy Land. Conrad arrives at Jerusalem. Baldwin III urges on the war. The Crusaders besiege Damascus and are repulsed. Ayla, the father of Saladin, displays Crusaders in Spain and Portugal. Sugar, Minister of France. Unfortunate results of this crusade. The conquest of Nureddin, the death of Raymond, Rosalind, Sugar, and Saint Bernard. Pages 329 to 381. Book 7 AD 1148 to 1188. Third Crusade. The religion of Muhammad stayed at the east at the time of the Third Crusade. Dynasties of the Saracens and the Turks. Almost annihilated. Caliphs of Baghdad. The chiefs of Islamism. Heroic character of Nureddin. Capture of Ascalon by Baldwin III. Baldwin's death. His brother more elected. His successor. Disguised in Egypt. Warlike. Preparations against. Capture of Troy by Baldwin. The Syrians invade Egypt. Baldwin marries the daughter of the Emperor Daniel. Makes war on Egypt. Deposition and death of the Caliph. The Fatimid dynasty extinguished. Extensive power of Nureddin, the Sultan of Aleppo and Damascus. Saladin, the vizier of Egypt. Death of Nureddin, Emperor of the Atabecs. Declines. Death of Amori, the victories of Saladin in Syria. Baldwin IV. King of Jerusalem. The Mamelukes. Gaius Lusignan. Renaud de Chatillon, raised to the throne of Antioch. His various military adventures. Rebellion of Guy de Lusignan. Described the state of Jerusalem. Interview between Henry II of England and Heraclius, Patriarch of Constantinople. Philip Augustus, King of France. Deaths of Baldwin IV and Guy de Lusignan. The Sovereign of Jerusalem. Sibylla, daughter of Amori. The Templars defeated with great slaughter. Tiberius taken by Saladin. Disastrous defeat of the Christians. Capture of the True Cross. Guy de Lusignan and many distinguished knights taken prisoners or slain. Saladin captures Ptolemy, Ascalon, Gaza, and numerous other cities in Palestine. He takes possession of Jerusalem. Sufferings of the Christians. The Archbishop of Tyre preaches in support of the Holy War. Henry II of England. Richard I and Philip of France determined on renewing the Holy War. Persecution and massacre of the Jews. Archbishop Baldwin preaches the crusade in England. Frederick Barbarossa engages in the crusade. Miraculous vision. Contentions between the Greeks and the Latins. Andronicus of Constantinople dethroned. The Greeks defeated by Barbarossa. His victorious career. His death. Pages 382 to 450. Book 8. AD 1188 to 1192. The conquest of Saladin. Conrad of Montferrat. Siege of Tyre. Marquis of Montferrat, the Green Knight siege of Tripoli, William, King of Sicily, engages in the Holy War, Admiral Margaret defends Tripoli, capture of Tortosa, heroic defense of Carrick, release of Guy de Lusignan, his siege of Ptolemy, and his numerous conflicts with Saladin, description of Ptolemy, Caracosh, minister of Saladin, Conrad, Marquis of Tyre, fits out a fleet for the Holy Land, bravery of the Mamluks, death of Andreda, Brienne, defeat of the Crusaders at Ptolemy by Saladin, death of Frederick, Duke of Swabia, and of Sibylla, wife of Guy de Lusignan, disputes about the succession to the Kingdom of Jerusalem, Humphrey de Thorun, Conrad, Eleanor of Guienne, Philip of France arrives at Palestine, Cyprus, captured by Richard I. His marriage to Berengaria of Navarre, Jane, Queen of Sicily, Isaac Camillus, disputes respecting the sovereignty of Jerusalem, arrival of Richard I before the walls of Ptolemy, his quarrels with Philip of France, conflicts with Saladin, Ptolemy taken by the Christians, died of Chateauneuf, Jocelyn de Montmorency, and some of the greatest nobility of Europe, slain, the Mohammedans, Louis of, Duke of Austria, Philip of France, quits Palestine, and returns to France, Battle of Arcer, Ascalon destroyed by Saladin, and rebuilt by Richard I. Richard marches on Jerusalem, Conrad assassinated, Treaty of Peace between Richard and Saladin, Guy de Lusignan obtains the sovereignty of Cyprus, Palestine ceded to Henry, Count of Champagne, characters of Richard I and Saladin, Leopold of Austria detains Richard as a prisoner, death of Saladin, Malik Adel takes possession of Egypt pages 451 to 509. History. Iraq. The Crusaders. Bulgaria. AD 300 to 1095. And the early stages of the church, and question was in that time, of making pilgrimages to the Holy Land. Judea, full of religious remembrances, was still the promised land of the faithful. The blessings of heaven appeared to be in store for those who visited Calvary, the tomb of Jesus Christ, and renewed their baptism in the waters of the Jordan. Under the reign of Constantine, the ardor for pilgrimages increased among the faithful. They flocked from all the provinces of the empire to worship Jesus Christ upon his own tomb, and to trace the steps of their God in that city which had but just resumed its name, and which the piety of the people had to issue from its ruins. The Holy Sepulchre presented itself to the eyes of the pilgrims surrounded by magnificence which redoubled their veneration, and its new cavern had become a marble temple, paved with precious stones and decorated with splendid colonnades. To the east of the Holy Sepulchre appeared the Church of the Resurrection, in which notable colonnades mingled with the arts of Greece and Rome. Constantine celebrated the 31st year of his reign by the inauguration of this church, and thousands of Christians came, on occasion of the solemnity, to listen to the panegyric of Christ from the lips of the learned and holy Bishop Eusebius. Saint Helena, the mother of the emperor, repaired to Jerusalem at a very advanced age, and caused churches and chapels to be built upon Mount Tabor, in the city of Nazareth, and in the greater part of the places which Christ had sanctified by his presence and his miracles. From this period, pilgrimages to the Holy Land became much more frequent. The pilgrims, no longer in dread of the persecutions of the pagans, could now give themselves up, without fear, to the fervor of their devotion. The Roman eagles, ornamented with the cross of Jesus Christ, protected them on their march. They everywhere trampled on the fragments of idols, and they traveled amidst the abodes of their fellow Christians. When the Emperor Julian, in order to weaken the authority of the prophecies, undertook to rebuild the temple of the Jews, numerous were the origins related by which God confounded his designs, and Jerusalem, for that attempt even, become more dear to the disciples of Jesus Christ. The Christians did not cease to visit Palestine. Saint Jerome, who, towards the end of the 4th century, had retired to Bethlehem, informs us in one of his letters that pilgrims arrived in crowds in Judea, and that around the Holy Tomb the praises of the Son of God were to be heard, uttered in many languages. From this period, pilgrimages to the Holy Land were so numerous that several doctors and fathers of the church thought it their duty to point out the abuses and danger of the practice. They told Christians that long voyages might turn them aside from the path of salvation, that their God was not confined to one city, that Jesus Christ was everywhere where faith and good works were to be found. But such was the blind zeal which then drew the Christians towards Jerusalem, that the voice of the holy doctors was scarcely heard. For the councils of enlightened piety were not able to abate the ardor of the pilgrims, who believed they should be wanting in faith and zeal if they did not adore Jesus Christ in the very places where, according to the expression of Saint Jerome, the light of the gospel first shone from the top of the Holy Cross. As soon as the people of the West became converted to Christianity, they turned their eyes to the East. From the depths of Gaul, from the forests of Germany, from all the countries of Europe, new Christians were to be seen hastening to visit the cradle of the faith they had embraced. An itinerary for the use of pilgrims takes them as a guide from the banks of the Rhone and the Jordan to the shores of the Jordan, and conducted them on their return from Jerusalem to the principal cities of Italy. 5. When the world was ravaged by the Goths, the Huns, and the Vandals, the pilgrimages to the Holy Land were not at all interrupted. Pious travelers were protected by the hospitable virtues of the barbarians, who began to respect the cross of Christ, and sometimes even followed the pilgrims to Jerusalem. In these times of trouble and desolation, a poor pilgrim, who bore his scrip and staff, often passed through fields of carnage, and traveled without fear amidst armies which threatened the empires of the East and the West. Illustrious families of Rome came to seek an asylum at Jerusalem, and upon the tomb of Jesus Christ. Christians then found, on the banks of the Jordan, that peace which seemed to be banished from the rest of the world. This peace, which lasted several centuries, was not troubled before the reign of Heraclius. Under this reign, the armies of Khosroes, King of Persia, invaded Syria, Palestine, and Egypt. The Holy City fell into the hands of the worshippers of idols. The conquerors bore away into captivity vast numbers of Christians, and profaned the churches of Jesus Christ. All the faithful deplored the misfortunes of Jerusalem, and shed tears when they learned that King of Persia had carried off, among the spoils of the vanquished, the cross of the Savior, which had been preserved in the Church of the Resurrection. Heaven, at length, touched by the prayers and affliction of the Christians, blessed the arms of Heraclius, who, after 10 years of reverses, triumphed over the enemies of Christianity and the Empire, and brought back to Jerusalem Christians whose chains he had broken. Then was to be seen an emperor of the East, walking barefooted in the streets of the Holy City, carrying on his shoulders to the summit of Calvary the wood of the true cross, which he considered the most glorious trophy of his victories. This imposing ceremony was a festival for the people of Jerusalem and the Christian Church, which, latter still, every year celebrates the memory of it. 6. When Heraclius re-entered Constantinople, he was received as the liberator of the Christians, and the kings of the West sent ambassadors to congratulate him. But the joy of the faithful was not of long duration. Towards the beginning of the 7th century there had arisen, in an obscure corner of Asia, a new religion, opposed to all others, which preached dominion and war. Muhammad had promised the conquest of the world to his disciples, who had issued almost naked from the deserts of Arabia. By his passionate doctrine he was able to inflame the imagination of the Arabs, and on the field of battle knew how to inspire them with his own impetuous courage. His first successes, which must have greatly exceeded his hopes,
Hatred.
so many miracles, increasing the confidence of his partisans, and carrying conviction to the minds of the weak and wavering. The political state of the East seemed to offer no obstacle to the progress of a sect which, from its birth, showed itself everywhere with fire and sword. The worship of the Magi was sinking into contempt. The Jews scattered throughout Asia were opposed to the Sabines and divided amongst themselves. And the Christians, under the names of Eutychians, Nestorians, Maronites, and Jacobites, were engaged in heathen, reciprocally, torn by intestine wars and attacked by the barbarous races of Tartars, had lost both its power and splendor. Waiting for within was seeking to its fall. Everything was perishing in the east, says Bossuet. A new religion, a new empire, sprang up even in the ruins. The armed doctrine of Muhammad invaded, within a very short period, the three Arabias, a part of Syria, and a large division of Persia. After the death of the Prophet of Mecca, his lieutenants and the companions of his first exploit carried on his great work. The sight of conquered provinces only increased the fanaticism and the bravery of the Saracens. They had no fear of death in the field of battle, for, according to the words of their prophet, paradise, with all its voluptuous pleasures, awaited those who precipitated themselves upon the enemy, and behind them hell opened its abysses. Their conquests were so much the more rapid, from their uniting, in their military and religious government, the prompt decision of despotism with all the passions that are met within a republic. Masters of Persia and Syria, they soon took possession of Egypt. Their victorious battalions flowed on into Africa, planted the standard of the Prophet upon the ruins of Carthage, and carried the terror of their arms to the shores of the Atlantic. From India to the streets of Cadiz, and from the Caspian Sea to the ocean, language, manners, religion, everything was changed. What had remained of paganism was annihilated, together with the worship of the Magi. Christianity scarcely subsisted, and Europe itself was threatened with a similar destruction. Constantinople, which was the bulwark of the West, saw before its walls innumerable hordes of Saracens. Several times besieged both Persian and Med, the city of Constantine only owed its safety to the Greek fire, to the assistance of the Bulgarians, and to the inexperience of the Arabs in the art of navigation. During the first age of the Hijra, the conquests of the Muslims were only bounded by the sea which separated them from Europe. But when they had constructed vessels, no nation was safe from their invasion. They ravaged the isles of the Mediterranean, the coast of the American Greece. Baltimore treason was on that coast of Spain, where they overturned the monarchy of the Goths. They took advantage of the weakness of the children of Clovis to penetrate into the southern provinces of Gaul, and were only stopped in their invasions by the victories of Charles Martel. Amidst the first conquests of the Saracens, they had turned their eyes towards Jerusalem. According to the faith of the Muslims, Muhammad had been in the cities of David and Solomon. It was from Jerusalem that he set out to ascend into heaven in this nocturnal voyage. The Saracens considered Jerusalem as the house of God, as the city of saints and miracles. A short time after the death of the prophet, the soldiers of Omar besieged it. The Christians, animated by despair, swore to defend the city. The siege lasted 4 months, each day being marked by sorties or attacks. The Saracens approaching the walls with him, the words of the Quran never entered into the holy language our promised us. After enduring all the miseries of a long siege, the inhabitants of Jerusalem at length surrendered to the Caliph Omar, who himself came into Palestine to receive the keys and the submission of the conquered city. The Christians had the grief of seeing the gifts of the Holy Sepulchre broken by the presence of the infidels. The patriarch, Sophronius, who was
How has he got no
could not
damage?
refrain from repeating these words of Daniel, the abomination of desolation is in the holy place. Jerusalem was filled with mourning, a gloomy silence reigned in the churches, and in all the places in which the hymns of the Christians had so long resounded. Although Omar had left them the exercise of their worship, they were obliged to fulfill their crosses and their sacred the bell no longer summoned the faithful to prayer. The form of ceremonies was contradicted, and religion appeared, but as a desolate widow. The Caliph ordered a mosque to be erected on the spot whereon the Temple of Solomon had been built. The aspect of this edifice, consecrated to the worship of the infidels, still further increased the affliction of the Christians. History relates that the Patriarch Sophronius was unable to support decided so many profanations and died of despair, deploring the misfortunes and captivity of the holy city. In the meantime, the presence of Omar, of whose moderation became
Oh, humiliation.
restrained the jealous fanaticism of the Muslims. After his death, the faithful had much more to suffer. They were driven from their houses, insulted in their churches. The tribute which they had to pay to the new masters of Palestine was increased, and they were forbidden to carry arms or to mount on horseback. A leathern girdle, which they were never allowed to be without, was the badge of their servitude. The conquerors would not permit the Christians to speak the Arab tongue, sacred to the disciples of the Quran. And the people who remained faithful to Jesus Christ had not liberty even to pronounce the name of the Patriarch of Jerusalem without the permission of the Saracens. All these persecutions could not stop the crowd of Christians who repaired to Jerusalem. The sight of the holy city sustaining their courage as it heightened their devotion. There were no evils, no outrages, that they could not support with resignation, when they remembered that Christ had been loaded with chains, and had died upon the cross in the places they were about to visit. Among the faithful of the West who arrived in Asia in the midst of the early conquests of the Mussulmans, history has preserved the names of Saint Archelaus and Saint Antoninus of Plaisance. 7. The latter had borne arms with distinction when he determined to follow the pilgrims who were setting out for Jerusalem. He traversed Syria, Palestine, and Egypt. On his arrival on the banks of the Jordan, Judea had not yet fallen into the hands of the infidels. But the fame of their victories already filled the east, and their armies were threatening the holy city. Several years after the pilgrimage of Saint Antoninus, Archelaus, accompanied by Peter, a French hermit, set out from the coast of England in a vessel bound for Syria. He remained 9 months at Jerusalem, then under the dominion of the enemies of Christ. On his return to Europe, he related what he had seen in Palestine, and in all the sacred spots visited by the pilgrims of the West. The account of his pilgrimage was drawn up by a holy monk of the Hebrides, for the information and edification of the faithful. The Christians of Palestine, however, enjoyed some short intervals of security during the civil wars of the Mussulmans. 8. If they were not freed from their bondage, they could at least weep in peace upon the tomb of Christ. The dynasty of the Umayyads, which had established the seat of the Muslim Empire at Damascus, was always odious to the ever-formidable party of the Alites, and employed itself less in persecuting the Christians than in preserving its own precarious power. Merlin too, the last caliph of this house, was the most ferocious, a disciple of Christ. And when he, with all his family, sunk under the power of his enemies, the Christians and the infidels united in thanks to heaven for having delivered the East from its enemies. The Abbasides, established in the city of Baghdad, which they had founded, persecuted and tolerated the Christians by turns. The Christians, always living between the fear of persecution and the hope of a transient security, saw it left the cause of the happily gold time upon the reign of Harun al-Rashid, the greatest caliph of the race of Abbas. Under the sway of glory of Charlemagne, which had reached Asia, protected the churches of Egypt. 9. His pious liberality released the indigent of the Christians of Alexandria, of Carthage, and Jerusalem. The 2 greatest princes of their age testified their mutual esteem by frequent embassies. They sent each other magnificent presents. And, in the friendly intercourse of 2 powerful monarchs, the East and the West exchanged the richest productions of their soil and their industry. The presence of Harun created a lively surprise in the court of Charlemagne, and gave a high idea of the arts and riches of Asia. The monarch of the Franks took pleasure in showing to the envoys of the caliphs the magnificence of the religious ceremonies of the Christians. Witnesses, at Aix-la-Chapelle, of several processions, in which the clergy had exhibited all their most precious ornaments, the ambassadors, on their return to Baghdad, reported that they had seen men of gold. There was no doubt policy in the marks of esteem which Harun lavished upon the most powerful of the princes of the West. He was making war against the emperors of Constantinople and might just feel that they would interest the bravest among the Christian people of their times. The popular versions of Constantine foretold that the Latins would someday be the liberators of Greece. And in one of the first sieges of Constantinople by the Saracens, the reporting of the arrival of the Franks had remunerated the courage of the siege and terribly to the rest of the Muslims. In the time of Louis, the name of Jerusalem already exercised so powerful an influence over the Christians of the West that it was sufficient to rouse their warlike enthusiasm and raise armies to serve against the infidels. 2. Take from the Franks every pretext for a religious war, which might make them embrace the cause of the Greeks, and draw them into Asia. The Caliph neglected no opportunity of obtaining the friendship of Charlemagne, and caused the keys of the Holy City and of the Holy Sepulchre 10 to be presented to him. This homage, rendered to the greatest of the Christian monarchs, was celebrated with enthusiasm in contemporary legends, which afterwards caused it to be believed that this prince had made the voyage and completed the conquest of Jerusalem. 11. Pharaoh entreated the Christians of the Latin churches as own subjects, and the children of the Caliph imitated this moderation. Under their sway, Baghdad was the abode of the sciences and the arts. The Caliph, Al-Mamun, says an Arabian historian, was not ignorant that they who labor in the advancement of reason are the elect of God. Intelligence polished the manners of the chiefs of Islamism and inspired them with a toleration till that time unknown to Muslims. Whilst the Arabians of Africa were pursuing their conquests towards the west, whilst they took possession of Sicily and Rome itself saw its suburbs and its churches of St. Peter and St. Paul invaded and pillaged by infidels, the servants of Jesus Christ prayed in peace within the walls of Jerusalem. 12. The pilgrims of the west, who arrived there without danger, were received in an hospital, the foundation of which was attributed to Charlemagne. According to the report of the monk, Bernard, 13, who himself performed the pilgrimage to the Holy Land about the middle of the 9th century, the hospital for the pilgrims of the Latin Church was composed of 12 houses or hostelries. 2. This pious establishment were attached fields, vineyards, and a garden, situated in the valley of G-Sharper. This hospital, like those which the Emperor of the West founded in the north of Europe, had a library, always open to Christians and travelers. From the 10th century there existed in the neighborhood of the Fountain of Siloam a cemetery, in which were interred the pilgrims who died at Jerusalem. Among the tombs of the faithful dwelt the servants of God. This place, says the relation of Saint Antoninus, covered with fruit trees, dotted with sepulchres and humble cells, brings together the dead and the living, in presence at once a cheerful and a melancholy picture. To the desire of visiting the tomb of Jerusalem was joined the earnest wish to procure relics, which were then sought for with eagerness by the devotion of the faithful. All who returned from the East made it their glory to bring back to their country some precious remains of Christian antiquity, and above all the bones of holy martyrs, which constituted the ornament and the riches of their churches, and upon which princes and kings swore to respect truth and justice. The productions of Asia likewise attracted the attention of the people of Europe. We read in 14, Gregory of Tours, that the wine of Gaza was celebrated in France in the reign of Godrin. 15. That the silk and precious stones of the East added to the splendor of the dresses of the great and the noble. And that street, Eli, at the port of Dagobert, did not disdain to clothe himself in the rich stuffs of Asia. Commerce attracted a great number of Europeans to Egypt, Syria, and Palestine. The Phoenicians, the Genoese, the Byzantines, the merchants of Elysium, Marseille, had all stores at Alexandria, in the maritime cities of Phoenicia, and in the city of Jerusalem. Before the church of Saint Marilla Latine, says the monk Bernard, already quoted, extended a large place or square, which was called the Market of the Franks. Every year, on the 15th of September, a fair was opened on Mount Calvary, in which were exchanged the productions of Europe for those of the East. Which Syrian Christians were established even in the city of Baghdad, where they devoted devoted themselves to trade, exercised the art of medicine, and cultivated the sciences. They attained by their women the most considerable employments, and sometimes even obtained the command of cities and the government of provinces. One of the caliphs of the race of Abbas, 16,
No.
declared that the disciples of Christ were the most worthy to be trusted with the administration of Persia. In short, the Christians of Palestine and the Muslim provinces, the pilgrims, and travelers who returned from the east, seemed no longer to have any persecutions to dread, when all at once Muslims broke out in the east. The children of Iran soon shared the fate of the posterity of Charlemagne, and Asia, like the West, was plunged into the horrors of anarchy and civil war. As the empire founded by Muhammad, it was principal the spirit of conquest. As the state was not defended by any provident institution, and as all depended upon the personal character of the prince, it might easily be perceived that symptoms of decay began to appear as soon as there remained nothing else to conquer, and the chiefs ceased either to make themselves feared or to inspire respect. Thus, talents of Baghdad, rendered effeminate by luxury, and corrupted by long prosperity, abandoned the cares of empire, buried themselves in their Siracules, and appeared to reserve to themselves no other right than that of being named in the public prayers. The Arabians were now longer governed by the blind fear, and an ardent fanaticism which they had brought from the desert. Degenerated, like their chiefs, they no longer resembled their warlike ancestors, who would weep at night, having been present at a battle. The authority of the caliphs had lost its true defenders. And when despotism surrounded itself with flame, purchased on the banks of the Azaz, this foreign militia, called in to defend the throne, only precipitated its fall. New sectaries, seduced by the example of Muhammad, and persuaded that the world would obey those who should change values or opinions, added the danger of religious dissensions to that of political trouble. In the midst of the general confusion, the emirs or lieutenants, of whom several governed vast kingdoms, no longer offered anything beyond paying homage to the successor of the Prophet, and refused to send in either money or troops. The gigantic empire of the Abbasides crumbled away on all sides, and the world, according to the expression of an Arabian writer, was within the reach of him who would take possession of it. Thus, spiritual power was itself divided. Islamism beheld at one time 5 caliphs.
You said master.
The title of commander of the faithful and vicar of Muhammad. The numerous dynasties that sprung up amidst the troubles of Asia shared amongst them the spoils of the sovereigns of Baghdad. Those
Can't believe I didn't get on the board.
Persia and upon the banks of the Tigris, under the pretense of defending the Muslim religion, subjected their spiritual chiefs to the most humiliating subserviency. At the same time, the Fatimites, who pretended to be descended from Ali, and who had usurped the title of Caliph, raised armies and launched anathemas against the Abbasides. They had taken possession of Egypt, and they threatened to invade Syria and to march to Baghdad and dethrone the vicars of the Prophet. The Greeks then appeared to rouse themselves from their long supineness and sought to take advantage of the divisions and the humiliation of the Saracens. Nicephorus Phocas took the field as the head of a powerful army and recaptured Antioch from the Muslims. Already the people of Constantinople celebrated his triumphs and styled him the Star of the East, the death and the scourge of the infidels. He might, perhaps, have merited these titles if the Greek clergy had seconded his efforts. Nicephorus was desirous of giving to this war 17 a religious character, and to place in the rank of martyrs all who should fall in prosecuting it. The prelates of his empire condemned his design as sacrilegious, and opposed to him a canon of Saint Basil, the text of which recommended to him who had killed an enemy to abstain during 3 years from a participation in the holy mysteries. Deprived of the powerful stimulus of fanaticism, Nicephorus found among the Greeks more panegyrists than soldiers, and could not pursue his advantages against the Saracens, to whom, even in their decline, religion prescribed resistance and promised victory. His triumphs, which were celebrated at Constantinople with enthusiasm, were confined to the taking of Antioch, and only served to create a persecution against the Christians of Palestine. The Patriarch of Jerusalem, accused of keeping up an understanding with the Greeks, expired at the stake, and several churches of the Holy City were consigned to the flames. A Greek army, under the command of Germanicus, had advanced to the gates of Amidal, a city situated on the banks of the Tigris. This army was attacked in the midst of a hurricane by the Saracens, who routed it and made a great number of prisoners. The Christian soldiers who fell into the hands of the infidels heard, in the prisons of Baghdad, of the death of Nicephorus. And as Zimisces, his successor, gave no attention to their deliverance, their chief wrote to him in these terms: "You who leave us to perish in an accursed land, and who do not deem us worthy to be buried, according to Christian usages, in the tombs of our fathers, we cannot recognize you as a legitimate chief of the Holy Greek Empire. If you do not avenge those who fell before Amidal, and those who now sigh in foreign lands, God will demand a strict account of them of you at the terrible day of judgment." When Zimisces received this letter at Constantinople, says an Armenian historian, 18, he was penetrated with grief and
wanna take it
resolved to
off?
avenge the outrage inflicted upon
Yes,
religion and the empire. On all sides, preparations were set on foot for a fresh war against the Saracens. The nations of the West were no strangers to this enterprise, which proceeded, by more than a year, the first of the Crusades. Venice, which then enjoyed the commerce of the East, forbade her people, under pain of death, to convey to the Mussulmans of Africa and Asia either iron, wood, or any species of arms. The Christians of Syria and several Armenian princes repaired to the standard of Zimisces, who took the field and carried war into the territories of the Saracens. So great was the confusion which then prevailed among the Mussulman powers, and with such rapidity did one dynasty succeed to another, that history can scarcely distinguish what prince, 19, or what people ruled over Palestine and Jerusalem. After having defeated the Mussulmans on the banks of the Tigris, and forced the Caliph of Baghdad to pay tribute to the successors of Constantine, Zimisces penetrated, almost without resistance, into Judea, took possession of Caesarea, of Ptolemy, of Tiberias, Nazareth, and several other cities of the Holy Land. He was encamped upon Tabor when he received a deputation of the inhabitants of Ramallah and Jerusalem, who promised him obedience, and required of him troops to defend their cities. Zimisces received their submission and their request favorably, 20, and pursued the wreck of the Saracen army, which had sought refuge in some cities of Phoenicia and in the mountains of Libanus. After this first campaign, the Holy Land appeared to be on the eve of being delivered entirely from the yoke of the infidels, when the emperor died poisoned. His death at once put a stop to the execution of an enterprise of which he was the soul and the leader. The Christian nations had scarcely time to rejoice at the delivery of Jerusalem, when they learned that the Holy City had again fallen into the hands of the Fatimite caliphs, who, after the death of Zimisces, had invaded Syria and Palestine. The caliphs of Cairo, who had taken advantage of the transient conquests of the Greeks to extend their empire, at first treated the Christians as allies and auxiliaries. In the hope of enriching their new dominions and preparing the evils of war, they favored the commerce of the Europeans and tolerated the devotion of pilgrimages to the Holy Land. The markets of the Franks were re-established in the city of Jerusalem. The Christians rebuilt the hospitals of the pilgrims and the churches which were falling to decay. They began to forget the peaceful domination of the Abbasides and felicitated themselves upon living under the laws of the sovereigns of Cairo. And still greater right had they to hope that all their troubles were about to be at an end, when they saw the Caliph Hakim, whose mother was a Christian, ascend the throne. But God, who, according to the expression of contemporary authors, wished to try the virtues of the faithful, did not long delay to confound their hopes and raise new persecutions against them. Hakim, the third of the Fatimite caliphs, signalized his reign by all the excesses of fanaticism and outrage. Unfixed in his own projects, and wavering between two religions, he by turns protected and persecuted Christianity. He respected neither the policy of his predecessors nor the laws which he himself had established. He changed, on the morrow, that which he had ordained the preceding day, and spread disorder and confusion throughout his dominions. In the extravagance of his mind and the intoxication of power, he carried his madness so far as to believe himself a god. The terror which he inspired procured him worshippers, and altars were raised to him in the neighborhood of Falstadt, which he had given out to the flames. 16,000 of his subjects prostrated themselves before him, and adored him as sovereign of the living and the dead. Hakim despised Muhammad, but the Mussulmans were too numerous in his states to allow him to think of persecuting them. The god trembled for the authority of the prince, and allowed all his anger to fall upon the Christians, whom he gave up to the fury of their enemies. The places which the Christians held in the administration, and the abuses introduced into the mode of levying the imposts, with which duty they were charged, had drawn upon them the hatred of all the Mussulmans. When the Caliph Hakim had once given the signal for persecution, he found himself at no loss for executioners. At first, they who had abused their power were the objects of pursuit. The Christian religion became the next crime, and the most pious among the faithful were deemed the most guilty. The blood of the Christians flowed in all the cities of Egypt and Syria, their courage in the midst of torment only adding to the hatred of their persecutors. The complaints which escaped them in their sufferings, the prayers, even, which they addressed to Jesus Christ to put an end to their evils, were considered as a revolt, and punished as the most guilty treasons. It is probable that motives of policy joined with those of fanaticism in the persecution of the Christians. Gerbert, Archbishop of Ravenna, who had become Pope under the name of Sylvester II, had witnessed the oath to which the faithful were subjected in their pilgrimages to Jerusalem. On his return he excited the nations of the West to take up arms against the Saracens. In his exhortations, he made Jerusalem herself speak, made her deplore her misfortunes, and conjured Christian children to hasten and break her chains. The people were deeply moved with the complaints and groans of Shin. The Pisans, the Genoese, with Boson, king of Arles, undertook a maritime expedition against the Saracens, and made an incursion upon the coasts of Syria. These hostilities, and the number of the pilgrims, which increased every day, might well create distrust in the masters of the East. The Saracens, alarmed by sinister predictions, and by the imprudent menaces of the Christians, saw nothing but enemies in the disciples of Christ. From that time terror and death guarded the gates of Jerusalem. It is impossible, says William of Tyre, to describe all the species of persecutions to which the Christians were then exposed. Among the instances of barbarity cited by the historians, there is one which gave to Tasso the idea of his affecting episode of Olindus and Sophronia. One of the bitterest enemies of the Christians, in order to increase the hatred of their persecutors, threw, in the night, a dead dog into one of the principal mosques of the city. The first who repaired thither to morning prayer were seized with horror at the sight of this profanation, and proclaimed their anger aloud. Threatening clamors soon resounded in every part of the city. The crowd assembled in a state of tumultuous excitement around the mosque. The Christians were at once accused of this act of sacrilege, and all swore to wash out the outrage to their prophet in the blood of the perpetrators. All Christians were about to be immolated to the revenge of the Mussulmans, and already were they prepared for death, when a young man, whose name history has not preserved, presented himself in the midst of them. The greatest misfortune that could happen, said he, would be that the Church of Jerusalem should perish. When a people is threatened with destruction, it is just that a single man should sacrifice himself for the salvation of all. I here and now offer myself as a victim to die for you. To you I leave the charge of doing justice to my memory, and I recommend myself to your prayers. After pronouncing these words, which dissolved the assembly in tears, he quitted them, and repaired to the chiefs of the Mussulmans. He declared himself alone to be the author of the crime imputed to the Christians, and invoked upon himself the death with which his brethren were menaced. The Mussulmans, without being in the least touched by his generous devotion, were satisfied with the victim who offered himself to their vengeance. The sword was no longer suspended over the heads of the Christians, and he who had immolated himself for their safety went, according to the expression of William of Tyre, 21, to receive in heaven the reward reserved for those whose minds burn with the love of perfect charity. Nevertheless, other misfortunes awaited the Christians of Palestine. All religious ceremonies were interdicted. The greater part of the churches were converted into stables. That of the Holy Sepulchre was completely destroyed. The Christians, driven from Jerusalem, were scattered throughout the countries of the East. Old historians relate that the world took part in the mourning of the holy city and was seized with trouble and consternation. Winter, with its frosts and storms, showed itself in regions where, till that time, it had been unknown. The Bosphorus and the Nile bore sheets of ice upon their bosoms. Earthquakes were felt in Syria and Asia Minor, and there, shocks, which were repeated during 2 months, destroyed several large cities. When the account of the destruction of the holy places arrived in the West, it drew tears from all true Christians. We read in the Chronicle of the month Labor that Europe had likewise been presented with signs which foreboded great calamities. A shower of stones had fallen in Burgundy, and a comet and threatening meteors had appeared in the heavens. The agitation was extreme among all Christian nations. Nevertheless, they did not take up arms against the Mussulmans, but the whole of their vengeance fell upon the Jews, whom all Europe accused of having provoked the fury of the infidels. The calamities of the holy city rendered it still more venerable in the eyes of the faithful. Persecution redoubled the pious delirium of those who went into Asia to contemplate a city covered with ruins, and to behold an empty sepulchre. It was in Jerusalem, filled with mourning, that God most manifestly distributed his blessings and delighted to point out as well. Impostors constantly took advantage of this opinion of the Christian people to mislead the credulity of the multitude. To gain credit for their words, it was quite sufficient to exhibit letters, which, they said, had fallen from heaven into Jerusalem. At this period, a prediction, which announced the end of the world and the approaching coming of Jesus Christ into Palestine, very much increased the veneration of the people for the holy places. The Christians of the West arrived in crowds at Jerusalem, with the design of dying there, or there awaiting the coming of the sovereign judge. The month Labor informs us that the affluence of pilgrims surpassed all that could be expected from the devotion of these remote times. First were seen on the holy march before the lower classes, then counts, barons, and princes, all reckoning as nothing the grandeurs of the earth. The inconstancy of Hakim had, in a degree, mitigated the misfortunes of Jerusalem, and he had just granted liberty to the Christians to rebuild their churches when he died by the hand of the assassins. His successor, guided by a wiser policy, tolerated both pilgrimages and the exercise of the Christian religion. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre was not entirely rebuilt till 30 years after its destruction. But the spectacle of its ruins still inflamed the zeal and the devotion of the Christians. In the 11th century, the Latin Church allowed pilgrimages to suffice instead of canonical penances. Sinners were condemned to quit their country for a time, and to lead a wandering life after the example of Cain. This mode of performing penance agreed better with the active and restless character of the people of the West. It ought to be added that the devotion of pilgrimages, whatever may be the opinion of an enlightened philosophy, has been received, and even encouraged, in all religions. It belongs, too, to a sentiment natural to man. If the sight of a land once inhabited by heroes and sages awakens in us touching and noble remembrances, if the soul of the philosopher finds itself agitated at the sight of the ruins of Palmyra, Babylon, or Athens, what lively emotions must not the Christians have felt on these holy places, which God had sanctified by his presence and his blessing? The Christians of the West almost all unhappy in their own countries, and who often lost sense of their purpose in long voyages, appeared to be only important signifying of the traces of a consoling and helpful divinity, or of some holy personage. There existed no province without its martyr or its apostle, whose support they went to, implored. There was no city or secluded spot which did not preserve the tradition of a miracle, or had not a chapel open to pilgrims. The most guilty of sinners, or the most fervent of the faithful, exposed themselves to the greatest perils, and repaired to the most distant places. Sometimes they directed their steps to Apulia and Calabria. They visited Mount Gargan, celebrated by the apparition of Saint Michael, or Mount Cassin, rendered famous by the miracles of strength, Benedict. Sometimes they traversed the Pyrenees, and, in a country given up to the Saracens, esteemed themselves happy in praying before the altar. Saint Robert, the patron saint of Galicia. Some, like King Robert, went to Rome, and prostrated themselves on the tombs of the apostles St. Peter and St. Paul. Others traveled as far as Egypt, where Christ had passed his infancy, and penetrated to the solitudes of Set and Memphis, inhabited by the disciples of Anthony and Paul. A great number of pilgrims undertook the voyage to Palestine. They entered Jerusalem by the gate of Ephraim, where they paid a tribute to the Saracens. After having prepared themselves by fasting and prayer, they presented themselves in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, covered with a funeral cloth or robe, which they preserved with care during the remainder of their lives, and in which they were buried after their death. They viewed with holy respect and devotion the Mount of Olives and the Valley of Jehoshaphat. They quitted Jerusalem to visit Bethlehem, where the Savior of the world was born. Mount Tabor, rendered sacred by the Transfiguration, and all the places memorable for his miracles. The pilgrims next bathed in the waters of the Jordan, 23, and gathered in the territory of Jericho palms, which they bore back as evidences and relics to the west. Such were the devotion and spirit of the 10th and 11th centuries, that the greater part of the Christians would have thought themselves wanting in the duties of religion if they had not performed some pilgrimage. He who had escaped from a danger, or triumphed over his enemies, assumed the pilgrim's staff, and took the road to the holy places. He who had obtained by his prayers the preservation of a father or of a son, went to return his thanks to heaven far from his domestic hearth, in places rendered holy by religious traditions. A father often devoted his child in the cradle to a pilgrimage, and the first duty of an affectionate and obedient son, when past the age of childhood, was to accomplish the vow of his parents. More than once a dream, a vision in the midst of sleep, imposed upon a Christian the obligation of performing a pilgrimage. Thus, the idea of these pious journeys mixed itself up with all the affections of the heart, and with all the prejudices of the human mind. Pilgrims were welcomed everywhere, and in return for the hospitality they received, they were only asked for their prayers. Often, indeed, the only treasure they carried with them. One of them, desirous to embark at Alexandria for Palestine, presented himself with a scrip and staff on board his ship, and offered a book of the holy evangelists in payment for his passage. Pilgrims, on the route, had no other defense against the attacks of the wicked but the cross of Christ, and no other guides but those angels whom God has told to watch over his children, and to direct them in all their ways. The greatest merit in the eyes of the faithful, next to that of pilgrimage, was to devote themselves to the service of the pilgrims. Hospitals were built upon the banks of rivers, upon the heights of mountains, in the midst of cities, and in desert places, for the reception of these travelers. In the 9th century, the pilgrims who left Burgundy to repair to Italy were received in a monastery built upon Mount Cenis. In the following century, 2 monasteries, in which were received The travelers who head straight from their way occupied the places of the temples of idolatry on Montes Jovis, 24, and thence lost the name they had received from paganism, and took that of their pious founder, Saint Bernard de Menton. Christians who traveled to Judea found on the frontiers of Hungary and in the provinces of Asia Minor a great number of asylums raised by charity. Christians established at Jerusalem went to meet the pilgrims and often exposed themselves to 1,000 dangers whilst conducting them on the route. The holy city contained hospitals for the reception of all travelers. In one of these hospitals, the women who performed the pilgrimage to Palestine were received by religious females devoted
I gotta go
to
take care
the
of some of this
offices
turkey
charity.
stuff.
The merchants of Amalfi, Venice, and Genoa.
Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, it's not gonna be next time. Bye.